Now that election campaigns are in full swing here in Canada, there's one big question on many people's minds: who's going to actually make housing more affordable? Both the Liberals and the Conservatives seem to have a similar idea of where to start.
We're going to take the GST off new homes, axe the sales tax on homes of less than $1.3 million.
We are eliminating GST for first-time home buyers, and that is a savings of up to $50,000 off the price of a home.
Pretty much right out of the gate, both leaders promised to cut taxes on new homes. Let's go through the difference between these two plans, who would benefit the most, and what kind of impact those cuts might actually have on the housing crisis in Canada. Right now, if you buy a new home in Canada, or a home that's been renovated so much it's essentially new, you have to pay taxes on it, both provincial and federal. Each province has its own tax rate, and many have their own rebate programs too, but we're just going to focus on the federal tax here, because that's what the party leaders are promising to cut. And right now, the GST you pay on a new home is 5%, no matter where you live. So that's just an extra cost that anybody who buys new has to deal with, except if the market value of that home is under $450,000. In that case, you get a tax break, which sounds helpful until, of course, you remember what homes actually sell for in this country. If you're paying the average price in a bigger city these days, odds are you are not eligible for the tax break that's currently in place. Which is why both the Liberals and the Conservatives are promising to extend this tax cut by raising the ceiling of eligibility. Under Mark Carney's plan, you'd be able to buy a new home for up to $1 million GST-free. And under Pierre Poilievre's plan, you could buy a new home for up to $1.3 million GST-free. So let's do the math here and calculate the maximum possible savings. New construction, it costs you $1.3 million exactly. Under Poilievre's plan, you're exempt from that 5% tax. And if we figure out what that adds up to, that is $65,000 in savings. Under Carney's plan, his ceiling's a fair bit lower. So you'd be buying a $1 million home and you would save $50,000. Let's go ahead and write that here. And of course, if you're buying something less expensive, your savings would drop off accordingly as well. But either way, that's a lot of money.
I mean, it's 5% of the sticker price. So there's pretty significant savings.
But we wanted to know, how many people will this actually help? Because as you've probably picked up on by now, the GST is only ever applied in the first place to new homes. So if you're buying a home that somebody else has lived in, you're already GST exempt anyway. And according to everyone we spoke to, new home sales are actually a very small portion of the overall real estate market.
This would apply to about 150,000 homes across Canada.
Historically, the city of Toronto had about 100,000 resale home sales per year, just Toronto, right? So there are definitely more homes selling each year that are existing rather than new.
So both the Liberal and Conservative tax cuts would apply to a relatively narrow band of home buyers. But let's just say you're one of those people who is in the market for a brand new property and you're thinking, hey, great, I'm gonna get 5% off. Except you realize that the home you've had your heart set on is just a little bit more expensive than the $1 million or $1.3 million that makes you eligible for the tax cut. Well, sorry to say, you're completely out of luck, because neither tax exemption would apply to the portion of the sale that's within $1 or $1.3 million. It's actually a really steep drop-off, where as soon as the total sale price exceeds that ceiling, the entire tax cut no longer applies.
There is a bit of a fiscal cliff here. I think what the parties are trying to do here is avoid the criticism that, somebody builds a $20 million mansion somewhere and gets a rebate check. But it does have that kind of weird feature where, there might be a bunch of homes that we want to incentivize get built, but just can't because of that drop off.
Now, Other than that difference in drop-off of either 1 million or 1.3 million, there is one other big difference between Carney and Poilievre's plans, and that is who is eligible.
Mark Carney's plan is a tax credit that would effectively only apply to first-time buyers who are buying a new home. Poilievre's plan applies to everybody.
So let's underline that again. Carney's plan is only for first-time home buyers, and only if you plan to actually live in the home. Poilievre's plan is open to anyone, no strings attached. So his plan, in theory, would help the most people, right? Especially because if you think about the Liberal plan, how many first-time buyers are buying brand new?
New homes are more expensive than existing homes. So they're not typically a first-time home buyer product, or that's not the first thing that first-time home buyers are usually looking at.
And sure enough, one survey showed in Ontario, only about a third of people buying new homes in 2023 said they were first-time buyers.
And I think it's one of the downsides of the Liberal plan, because there are a lot of other home buyers you would like to incentivize. You know, you might have a retired couple living in the suburbs of the GTA, have a large 4-bedroom suburban home. It'd be nice to be able to help them be able to downsize, get into, you know, perhaps a newly constructed 2-bedroom condo. It not only helps them, but then it frees up that larger 4-bedroom home for the next generation of families.
That's why there's probably a bit of an advantage to the Conservative plan in this case, in that it does apply to all types of buyers.
And by including everyone, Poilievre's other stated goal is to boost supply. The idea being, if you create more potential buyers of these new homes, that incentivizes builders to build more.
This will stimulate the construction of an additional 36,000 new homes above and beyond what would normally be built.
I think he's directionally absolutely correct that it should facilitate the building of more homes. Because the GST only applies to new housing, you're not kind of juicing demand across the board. You're trying to lower the cost of new construction.
There is something there where if you cut out that HST, it stimulates a few more builders to start building, adding to the supply, and then hopefully that supply-demand equilibrium works in favor of buyers and it puts some pressure, downwards pressure on pricing.
But let's think about which buyers benefit most under Poilievre's plan. Is it regular people who just want to own the home they live in, or is it the type of buyer looking to make money?
Because generally, pre-construction is quite a bit more expensive than resale. We have noticed that for the most part, the majority of pre-sales are to investors.
They're the ones that really dominate new home sales, especially in the condominium market.
And this becomes really obvious in college and university towns, like London, Ontario, where in 2022, 86% of all condos were owned by investors. Or Windsor and Kitchener-Waterloo, where over 60% of condos were investor-owned.
When you remove HST on something, the state is subsidizing someone's purchases. So the question is, who do you want to subsidize? Carney's government wants to subsidize first-time buyers. Poilievre's government wants to subsidize everybody, including investors. And I think this is the challenge with Poilievre's plan. We don't need to give investors more of an edge. We need to get families into buying homes.
And this is where we get to a more complex consideration with Poilievre's plan. Because nobody's saying investors are bad people, whatever it takes to build a home, right? But the types of homes investors most often prefer to buy, and so they tend to get built, are not necessarily the types of homes most Canadian families want to live in.
Pretty clear that everyday Canadians, especially with the demographics we're faced with right now and kind of over the next 10 years, is really about family-oriented, what we call the like missing middle part of housing. So at least 2 bedrooms would be really nice. Some square footage would be really nice.
The kind of place where you'd want to raise a kid. And investors tend to not like that market. You know, those homes are more expensive to begin with, so you have to invest more money up front. It's a little bit riskier and so on.
Take a look at Toronto, for example. Last year, of the almost 38,000 homes built, only about a quarter of them were single, semi-detached, or townhomes. The rest, 3/4, were apartments or condos, which might be fine, except back in the 80s and 90s, a new condo in Toronto would have been, on average, about 1,000 square feet. Fast forward to a more recent period we can measure between 2016 and 2020, the average size dropped to less than 650 square feet. That's not a great family space.
The investor type product has been more like pretty small single bedroom units, condos generally. That's probably not the type of housing that we really need.
While we do need supply, we have to make sure we're getting the right type of supply.
There's no one policy that is going to solve the housing crisis, and limited GST certainly isn't that policy either, but it's going to take a whole bunch of incremental policies like this to make a difference.
So here's where I think the experts we spoke to landed on this. It's not like either plan is going to make the housing crisis worse, but to state perhaps an obvious point that I hope both leaders would agree with, cutting the GST is no miracle cure-all either. To figure out who can really move the needle on housing, we'd need to see a fully costed, comprehensive housing plan, and we need more than just campaign announcements.